Okay, hello everyone. This is the 22nd Automation Hour, and I have with me my co-host David Litton and Rakesh Gupta. So let's get going. All right, so in terms of our upcoming Automation Hour, I'll be presenting in 2 weeks. And if you're new to Flow or you've been trying to figure out and can't really get moving ahead on that, I would suggest attending the session that I'm going to be leading, and it's really going through the basics of Flow. And then we're very excited to offer our new series, which will be 4 back-to-back sessions covering each skill set. So we'll start off the beginner series on August 18th with Eric Smith, and then lead on to the intermediate series with Nana Gregg, and then advanced with Sawyer Martin. So that will actually take us into 2018, believe it or not. So we've received feedback about the timing of the sessions might not work out for everyone, so I highly recommend that everyone go and register for these sessions, regardless of whether you're going to attend or not. So at least you get the notification once the recording is out there, and then you could access the recording instead of attending it live. All right, so logistics-wise, all lines are muted. Please use the chat function to ask questions throughout the session. And if we are not able to address all your questions, we'll take it out on the success community. So that's our Salesforce Automation Hour success community. And like I said, we will be posting the deck as well as the recording on our site, as well as the success community and on Twitter after the fact. So shout out to our sponsor, Concrete.io. Thank you for continuing to support this webinar series. And for those who have not met us in whatever forum, that's David, Rakesh, and myself. So we do want to offer a special discount to Rakesh's books. So we have 2 discounts of 15% and a 50%. So you'll have access to these codes once we post the deck after today's session. And with that, I am going to hand it over to David, our co-host, who will be presenting today's session.
All right. Thank you, Jen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
So I'm David Litton. I'm a part of the solutions team here at iVictorium Solutions. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. I'm a user group co-leader here with Chad Seals, who was the previous Automation Hour presenter. So doing some awesome stuff there. If you're near Birmingham, give us a look and maybe come over and come to one of our meetings. I've got over 5 years of Salesforce experience and a few certs to back that up. My blog, Salesforce Sidekick, I try to have around bi-weekly posts. So subscribe to that and stay up to date on what's coming out. I've got a lot of Flow, in addition to Jen and Rakesh's sites, I've got a lot of Flow kind of beginner guides to help you out that can hopefully help you with any of the things as you're starting to learn what the different pieces of Flow are. And you can also follow me on Twitter at David Litton SFDC. Sorry in advance for all the Chicago Cub tweets that I do retweet and tweet about. So you've been warned if you do decide to follow me. So what are we doing on today's call? So we're going to start off and talk about where you can use Flow and discuss some of your options for those flows, and then some common roadblocks that we face with visual flow screens. We're going to finish it up then with 3 demos. The first one we're going to go over is dynamic colors and images. we're going to then go over one of my favorite pieces, dynamic record choices. And we're going to kind of combine a little bit of demo 1 and 2 to then make a pretty cool demo of using templates with dynamic record choices in Flow. So overall, this is a kind of intro to screens, and also for some of you that maybe just don't have a ton of experience using and customizing Flow screens, this is going to be a great chance for you to see some of the cool tips and tricks that Flow screens have. So the first place that we commonly use Visual Flow is Visual Force pages. So this is unfortunately kind of the only way that we can access a flow as a community user or an externally unauthenticated site.com user. So if I wanted to put a flow as a survey or really anything that a customer community user needs to access, whether they're authenticated or not, it's going to have to at this point be embedded inside a Visual Force page. So we don't have a flow component yet that is externally available, or if you've noticed that the Lightning design skin for the new Flow UI, that's through the URL, and then also inside of the Lightning app or Lightning record pages. So that's also not really available for us. So that is one consideration. You are kind of limited in how you can deploy it to communities. We've also got quick actions. So in a quick action, you're able to use a Visual Force page. So that way you can actually do similar to the communities or site.com. You could put a flow in a quick action and reference it there. I've used it a few times. It's not the best user experience, but it's functional. So it's there if you need it, but there's typically a better way to do it than to put the visual flow in a quick action. And then the last one there is Lightning component. So you can kind of do a Lightning component that has a Visual Force page inside of it that's referencing the flow. I believe it was Doug Ayers that had a recent blog post on that specific scenario with some great examples. So definitely check out Doug's blog if that's something that is interesting you. The second option is through a URL. So that's, as mentioned around the Visual Force piece, not something that we can do for an external community user. So that's going to be just your internally licensed users, Salesforce platform users, Salesforce full license users, that you can access the flow through the URL. And with that, you are able to get the Lightning runtime skin, even if you are using Classic. So it does look a little bit better if you're doing it that way. There are some considerations that you have to use when you're doing that. With the if you're creating records, it can be a little bit more difficult to have somebody redirected to a newly created record and use the URL. There are ways to kind of get around it, but in general, most of the time you'll use Visual Force when you're trying to do something like that. And then we've got the awesome Lightning app page as well as the Lightning record page, where we can just drag in the flow component that was generally available as of this past release, and we can set our variables from inside that flow component, pass in the record ID, and we're good to go. So that one, we get the nice new flow screen user interface, and we're able to display that on an app page. So if we wanted to create a separate app not really related to a record and have somebody go to a certain place and start doing some work, then that flow could be labeled or placed there. We also have on the record page, if you want to add a tab or just place it as part of the regular record page, you could do that. And then kind of off in the distance, it sounds like we will be getting an official Lightning component that we can in some way reference flow. So not really sure what that is, but it looks like that's something on the roadmap that we can at least expect by maybe winter 18. It might be summer, or string. Who knows? But it's at least something that has been talked about. So that's good news for us as we're looking to use flow more and more inside of Lightning Experience. So the first thing that we can do on a screen is we can put inputs in there. So the 7 inputs that we have available to us are text boxes, which are just a small little input. And with the text box, if you notice, there's not an email address. So that's where you're going to have to put an email. That's where you're going to have to put in phone. It's less specific than you have with the custom fields on an object. So just keep that in mind. But these do work. And if you need to have validation rules, you want to use some decisions to try to catch when an email might not be formatted correctly, to kind of check to make sure it's in the correct format so that it doesn't cause an error when you try to update a record and put an invalid email address in the record. So you do need to be mindful of some stuff like that when you are using the flow screens. It's not the most the simplest option out there when you are using some complex stuff that needs validation. If it's a little bit more straightforward, it's kind of plug and play, but otherwise you do need to make sure you do some decisions to correctly guide the end users as they're going through the screen. And then we've got date. Another thing to note about the date, there's not a date time field inside of here. So if you're trying to do a date time for something, you're going to have to get creative with maybe a date field and then a time pick list that they insert, or some other entry of that time, and then get creative with some formulas to create that date timestamp if it's not going to be the current date timestamp, which you can reference from the flow. So just keep that in mind when you are going through that and deciding whether or not flow is a good fit for you. But those are the kind of main inputs that a end user has, and those are just kind of the free text where they pick the value they want to have in it. So we also have choices and multi-select choices, and this is where it gets interesting. Inside of here, we've got 3 different options. We've got static choices, and a static choice is where you get to pick the value that you want. You also get to pick the API name, you get to pick the field label, and you get to pick the default value. So what is that value that's being referenced there? And that's important to note, that you want to try to use that as much as you can, because if you're going to reference that choice later down the road, and all of your choices have the same default value of null, then you can sometimes run into some errors there when it will take you down the wrong path if you're not paying attention. So definitely keep an eye out on that depending on how you're using your static choices. The other option is pick list, which is a great new feature that came out a little over a year ago, and that allows you to reference any pick list on any object. So it doesn't matter what objects you are actually working on. If it's account, it doesn't have to be an account pick list. You get to pick the object in your org. If you have a pick list object that houses all of your pick lists, that could even work. You just have to specify which pick list in Salesforce you want to reference. One of the downsides of this is we don't have a dependent pick list option inside of the flow screen. So if you've got multiple levels, it's going to be a little bit harder for you to figure out how you want to architect that and make the multi-level pick list functional. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you're just trying to get an easy pick list for somebody to view, this is a great way, and it allows it to update your flows when you make the change in the Salesforce backend, as opposed to having to go create a new version of your flow. And then dynamic record choices. This is where instead of, so the previous 2 options were using text values. So a static choice and a pick list, those are both text values. A dynamic record choice, we're doing a query on records inside of Salesforce. So when we say that we're doing a query, it's like running a report or creating a list view. We're setting are filters on the object we want to return and the types of records inside of that object, and then we're displaying those values to the end user. Now, if we wanted to use, and in the dynamic record choice, we have a little bit more flexibility in how we want to present that to the user. We can go with a radio button or a drop-down list because we're expecting them to, in some cases, have more than one returned record. So we got to determine if we want them to be able to select one value only or potentially use those multi-select choices. And when you use the multi-select choices, it's going to, depending on what you're trying to do, you might need to install. I've got an app out there for on my site to parse multi-select pick list values. There's also one on Succeed with Salesforce, and Rakesh has one as well. So it's pretty popular out there to parse those multi-select pick list values that get presented, and then you can determine what you do from there. So dynamic record choices are really powerful, and we'll get to see those in action in a little bit. And then this is one of my favorite parts of Flow that sometimes just doesn't get enough credit, is the display text. So this is your output values that you can put in, and you can really do quite a lot. So that's what we're really going to be trying to focus on here, and covering all the different ways that we can use output text in relation to some of those dynamic record choices to really streamline this process for an end user and make it the flow a little bit better than just some inputs. So some common roadblocks that we hit with Flow. The first one, and I think everyone can relate, is styling. So with styling, I'm sorry, you really just can't win. Especially right now, we don't have that much control over the Lightning experience version of this. So if I'm using Visualforce, I've got a lot more control over that UI, where I can use some JavaScript to change the button name. So I could rename my button value of next to something else. I can style around it. But if I'm using the new Lightning experience, it's going to be through a URL or the app component, and I'm not able to further style that. So we're really kind of limited on what we can do around the screen outside of the display text. If anyone's seen the Now You See Me, Now You Don't new feature, I had the chance to play with it a little bit, and it only works for those static choices. So when you have a static choice, and let's say you select a static choice of email and you have a static choice of phone, it will dynamically then show the field phone or email that you selected. But right now, you only have the option to show one text field. We're not able to say, when this choice gets selected, show me 15 fields and 3 of them be text, 5 of them be dates, and the rest of them be long text boxes. So there's just limitations right now to what that can do. So it's a great improvement, but it's not fully functional in terms of some of the ways that I've tried to use it. But if you're doing just something basic, it will work for you. And then similar to the styling, the buttons and enter advances, if you've tried to tab and just hit enter to go to the next screen, that doesn't really work. Maybe one day that'll get fixed, or maybe somebody's figured a way out to do that and I haven't heard of it. But some of the clicking to the next page and renaming of buttons can be a little bit of a annoyance for end users and management as they're agreeing upon this as a solution. And then related records don't refresh on the record that you're on. So if I was to create or have a flow on an account and create a task, that task that I just created is not going to show up on my account page until I refresh it. If I updated the account information at the same time, my account, let's say I updated my account name or account number, that would be there and that would be visible to me immediately. But the related records, if I created a task, created a contact, whatever it might be, those take a little bit longer to show up and you have to refresh the page. So there's some just things that you got to keep in mind as you're working with Flow. Most of these I don't really see as a deterrent for actually using Flow, because the amount of functionality and the ease of use that you're getting, instead of having to style a visual force page. If you've got the developer resources to be able to do that, fantastic, but not everyone always is able to do that, and this really makes it easier to create. So those are the roadblocks. And one last thing before we get into demos is get creative. So I love this post on Succeed with Salesforce of using an inline visual force page to have an auto launch flow to trigger an action. So every time, if you go to Succeed with Salesforce and look for this blog post, every time that he or the end user would go to that account page, it would trigger the flow and process builder to make an update. So that way you can have stuff run in the background automatically when somebody enters a page, whatever that might be. If you're creating some sort of audit record on an object of who's looked at this record, or trying to have other things be automated from it, it's up to you, but you can really get creative and use flows in a lot of different places to solve your needs. All right, so we're going to do our first demo of dynamic colors and images in Flow. So bear with me one second as we get out of here. All right, so here I've got my flow. What we've got here is the image display. So I'm going to double click in here. You're going to see this looks pretty odd. So we've got our image display here. I can add fields into it. Click on this field. We can see it's just a text area, display text. So I could add something above it, and that image gets a little messy, but it's there, and I can add something below it. So we can add in our fields, and we can reference what's going on there. So let's take a look and see what's actually going on here. So I see that I've got top of Astro's head. I've got some bold text here, and this is part of the display text. So to kind of show you from the front, if I was to create a new display text, we've got our text here. So if I click out, you'll see that the text is now visible there. Let me zoom in just a little bit. All right, so the text is there, and that's great. I can reference variables that I've put in, or other things that are in my flow, like the default flow system global variable. So if I wanted to put in a fault message, whatever those variables are, they're available to me. Now, if you hit the text option up here to go to rich text, that's going to switch us over, and you'll see that I've got a lot more options now to make things bold, change the color, formatting, add bullets. All that's pretty easy to do, and I can still add in those variables. So with that, I can make this bold. Sometimes it'll make it sometimes where you got to click twice, but with this you can make it bold. And if I click this again to go back to the non-rich text editor, we got this lovely HTML that is now taking up this page. So it really makes it hard to read as you're working through this part. If you were to try to look at that and not know HTML very well, it would be a little daunting at first. But if you click that T again, you'll get back to the rich text editor and it'll make sense. But what you can do is you can go to a site like W3 Schools or anywhere else that you might like to kind of work on just an HTML document. If you're creating an email template of some sort, it's going to be that same sort of format. And the great part is if you do treat it as an email template, you can put images and stuff inside of the email template. So that's what we did up here. So if I was to go back to the just the HTML of this and scroll down a little bit, we can see that I've got this image tag in here. So I'll break it out a little bit. So this is my image tag, and I just pasted in that URL, put in the width and height that I wanted, and just like that, we're good to go with a image in my flow. And I did the same one for the automation hour. So now if I was to go run this flow, we can see that we've got both images there, and no effort at all to make something look a little bit better. So if you've got a company logo, if you've got anything else that you're wanting to display, images are a great way to do that. So you don't have to go query them from a field, but that's something we'll show in a second that you can do. If you want to keep it static, just it's got to be a publicly visible or at least visible to the person that will be using the flow. They've got to have access to it, but same process, just insert that image. So makes it look a little bit cooler and not as bland. Now what we might want to do here is show on, I'm going to jump over to my account page. Gotta hide this. So over here we've got a lot of tasks, and I want to have a counter that shows maybe how many tasks we have, and based off of the type of task, we want to see a number alerting them either green or red that they've got a lot of open tasks. So I'm going to hit the edit page, and we're going to talk about or show how we can add a flow to Lightning pages. So we'll click on where we want it. I want to put it next to details. We want another tab here, so I'll hit add tab. And I don't see a name that really fits, so I'm just going to hit custom, and I'll just call this flow. So I'll go to my flow component, drag it in, and I got my dynamic flow screen here. I'll keep it at one column, and then I've got the ability to pass in variables. So I've got a variable already here called record ID. So I'll click this box to pass the record ID into that variable, hit save, and we're good to go. So just like that, I've added in the flow to my account page. So now it knows which account I'm on. We can see these images getting populated. And then I hit next, and we get open activities and this image. So let's take a look at what's going on there. So what I'm doing is I am querying all, with a fast lookup, I'm finding all of my activities tied to this account. So looking at this, I'm finding all tasks where it is closed, which is just saying that it's still an open, is false. So any ones where there's not a closed task, and then where the what ID equals the record ID that we're tied to. So it could be a little confusing, and I probably could write this better to get a correct calculation, because we're probably going to see maybe an incorrect number on the account, because accounts have tasks that roll up from opportunities and roll up from contacts. So they might not be the what ID, but they're still visible on the account. So that's something to keep in mind, but that's the criteria that we're putting there. And then we've got collection of open tasks, and we're just passing in the values that we might want to use here. So I've got this status indicator field that I added to my task. So if I go click on the status here, we can see that it's yellow because it's a status of in progress. If I was to switch this to not started, it's going to go to red. All right, so that's what we're doing to find our activities, and then we're going to loop through them. So the loop, we're just taking all of the activities that we found, and then we're going to make an S-object variable. I don't want to, we've got a few other webinars that dive into loops a little bit more, and there's plenty of blog posts on them, but this is just in concept. We're going through each of the variables or records that we found, and I'm going through this assignment and I'm adding a counter. So I want to know each time, got that wrong, we're adding 1 to the counter. So it's going to start at 0, and every time we have a record, it's going to iterate up 1 value. And then I've also got this variable called flag, which is the status indicator field, and that's that formula field that we saw on the finished screen there. So with that counter, I'm iterating up every single record that we have. So if I have 1 record, it's only going to go to 1. If I have 10, it's going to go to 10. And what we're going to do after we've counted all the records that we found tied to the account is we've got this color alert. So I'm just going to use a decision, and this decision is going to tell me whether I want it to be a red color or a green color. So if it's a count greater than 3, we want to show that as a red value. So if they've got more than 3 open activities on this account, we'll show it as red. This could be increased or decreased as I want, or add in additional colors that you might want to have in there. You could also use that status indicator field as well, but this, if you don't want to create a field, this is a good way to make it dynamic like that. But what we're doing here is assigning the red count, and we've got a variable called red count and equals count. And if it's a green one, we do a variable called green count equals count. So when I get to my final activity screen here, we have open activities, and then we're using the bold and colored to get green count and red count. Now, if I only populate the green count, then red count's null or empty, and it's not going to be visible. So the flow is really going to think of it as that. It's not going to know that red count's there, and red count's going to just be a blank space, or it actually won't even be a blank space. It'll just be empty completely. So there won't even be a space there. Now, if I only had a red value, then the green count would do the same thing. So the space, while we're putting green and red right next to each other, we're only going to be populating one of those variables. And here's where I'm assigning it as a color green. So that way I'm able to format it how I want for this specific screen element. So I'm not going to save that since we got the red in there as well. But let's jump back in real quick and just show, here's our flag variable, which I was assigning to that status indicator. So it's going to, at this time, it's going to pull that last task that goes through because we were doing an equals. But let's close this real quick. I'll make sure we save it. And all right, we hit next, and we see we've got 1 open activity. So if I was to add more activities that met the criteria of our component, we would have that iterate up, and it would dynamically say 3, 4, however many open activities we have, and once it hits that 3, it's going to be the color red. And then here we've got that status indicator. So if I was to go click on this, then we've got the status indicator there, which is what's being referenced. So a formula field can easily be visible on your flow template or on your flow page. So makes it nice and easy for you to make that screen just a little bit prettier. All right, jumping over to choice, dynamic record choices. So let's just walk through how to set one of these up. I'm going to jump on over to our templates and going to go to explore, and let's edit our dynamic record choice that is already created here. So a dynamic record choice, as I talked about a little bit earlier, we're able to pick the type of value. Normally I've seen it really just be text, but you can make it different. And then you pick the object. So I've got a template object in Salesforce right now. And if I was to go show you that template object, we've got 2 templates in there now. It's pretty basic. All we're doing is template name, which is going to be if we're sending an email, the subject, the type, maybe we want to send an SMS, and then the template. So that's what we're referencing as an object. And then we are able to filter it based off of criteria in our screen. And then in here for our choice label, we're able to say what we want to be visible. So in a dynamic record choice, we're only able to add in one field. We're not able to put in columns like you can in Visual Force. So in Visual Flow, you only have one value available. But when we have that value, we're able to have, we show a value, which is the label, we're able to store different values on the back end. So with this choice stored value, if I was to go look at the value on the back end that we'd be referencing, we can use the ID value to make it unique. So while they're seeing the name, they're actually selecting the ID for us on the back end. And then you also have the chance, in this case, I'm going to be using it as a select one value. So assigning the record fields works well here because I'm able to say that the name is the subject and the template's the body and save myself an assignment and a lookup after this. So with the dynamic record choice, wrong one. All we do is drag it into a choice here. So I threw this onto a radio button. I could also throw this into a multi-select pick list. And it can be visible that way. So let's jump back to this other flow real quick. And let's just show how this can be done on the other flow that we were using. So I'm going to just add in a multi-select checkbox. And we're just going to show the contacts really quick. So we're going to say, show me the contact name when, and we'll store their ID. And we're going to say when the account ID equals our record ID. And I don't need to store an option or values down here, so I'm just going to ignore that. And then we'll hit save. Oh, got to save as. We'll activate it real quick, go to our account page. And just like that, I've got the contacts on my account visible here. So with dynamic record choices, you're able to create either drop-downs, checklists, and it's just really powerful and allows you to put those filters to help streamline the entry point for your end user. All right, so let's finish it up with completing the template demo, showing you dynamic record choices, how it impacts with the text templates, and what you're able to do there. All right, so let's walk through what we're doing on this template. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be finding the contact. I've hard-coded myself in here just to keep it simple, but you would do a dynamic lookup based off of the contact record that you're on. Normally this would be from a flow screen where the user's got some sort of entry up until this point. But for the sake of just having it run and be sent to myself, we'll keep it that way. I'm able to grab values from that contact, such as the email, the first name, the contact name, any other fields that I would want to reference. I can also go query other records throughout with other lookups and reference them as values. So after I find my contact, I have that pick list of type. So if I go back to our template option here and we go to create a new template, we have the type field here. So it's going to be email or SMS. So based off of what type they select and they hit the next button, then they're going to be given a dynamic record choice of the type of template they want to send out. So if I had an SMS template, that's going to be going down a different path than an email template. So right now I've got this set up only to work for the email path, but once we select that template, what we're going to do in this send email is we have our template body, our template subject, and our contact's email. So I'm using the comma separated. You can do collection. You can also have a little bit more functionality by saying the sender or sender type, but at this point we're expecting it to be from the end user running the flow, so we're good to go with how it's set up. So that is what the flow is doing, but let's take a look at what our template's doing, because the template's where the fun happens. So if we wanted to say register for our next webinar, and then I wanted to have it personalized for that person that I was working on, I want to go look and I want to go find that contact variable. So I want to reference the contact's first name. So I'll copy that value and I'll paste that in. So what this is going to do when I query, just like when we queried the record value for the image, the little stop sign indicator, this is going to do the same thing. So once we push this into flow, that value is in the flow variable format. So it's going to override, even if for some reason we wanted to send something out in this format, it's going to override it with the value that the flow has. So that way it's our merge field. So it's a little bit different from like the email template merge field, but it's going to do the same sort of functionality. So I can say contact first name, all right. So we'll create that, add a type email, hit save. We've got our template ready to go. And let's hit the run on this flow. So if I run this flow, we get our pick list options of email and SMS. So that is that pick list value. If I hit email, now we get that lovely template. And we're able to select which one we want it to be. So if I hit the thanks for attending automation hour today, that just sent out the email and we're good to go. So I just sent myself an email, but I want to show the value that we're having as the last piece here. So I'm just going to show the template values, and let's just use a display text to put in that subject and body. All right, so we'll run this again, hit email. We'll do the register for our next webinar, and you can see that we've got the value of Jack there. So just like that, I'm able to make a dynamic template outside of my flow that now I can help streamline the process and bring template selection into it for an end user. You could use this for emails. You could use this for SMS if you've got something like live message in your org. So it's pretty awesome. Just you got to make sure that you go find the variables that you're going to want to use through records lookups, and then make sure that you're using the right format for those. So if you're enabling an end user to maintain these templates, you definitely want to make sure that they know what variables are available to them if it's not something that you're going to be creating and managing yourself. All right, so that's all we got here. We got any questions yet?
There is currently one. I will give folks a few minutes to type in new ones, but Mo was asking if we could package up the flows to share with the audience.
Yeah, I could put those as reference flows and make it an unmanaged package. Definitely.
Okay, another question. I keep getting Stockwell errors when I do data loads when a flow runs. How do we ensure this doesn't happen? I thought Salesforce bulkified flows doesn't seem so if I keep getting these errors.
So they did bulkify it pretty well, but there's still definitely some issues. And most of those issues I feel like are typically when we have flow working alongside other pieces of automation. I'd say if you've got some managed code or really Apex code at all that's touching the same object as a flow, then you need to be careful what's going on there. So it's really, I don't know if y'all have found a better solution yet, Jen or Rakesh, for trying to see when you're getting close to hitting those limits, but you just got to be careful when you're using an object that has a lot of code associated to it.
All right, the next question from Lisa. Can you search for accounts in Flow like doing a Stockwell search?
Yeah, so that would be with the record lookup. So if I was to drag the record lookup out, we could say find accounts, and then I go search for my account object, and then I put the filters in that I want to have. So if you wanted to say that the created date is today, and show me all accounts that have that, then you can do that, and then reference the variable. But this, I did a record lookup, so actually that would just return one value. If you wanted to return multiple, you would need to use a fast lookup and then loop through those values.
Okay, Mo has another question. Flow errors. How is it still Salesforce have not enabled the end users to see flow errors instead of only the admin who gets the email? For auto launch flows, this is more of a problem. At least we can do that in screen elements. If a flow hits a validation error, the end user should see it. There's no point in the admin being aware only. Is there a workaround to this?
Not that I'm aware of, besides writing your validation rules to try to not trigger when it's through the process builder or flow. If you put some sort of exception of a backend field that you're referencing, maybe a checkbox or something. But other than that, I think that's just one of the common issues that we all run into a lot when we're using flow. You got anything, Jen, on that?
I have not come up with a good solution or workaround for that, unfortunately. I wish. Okay, we do have a few minutes left, so I'm just going to give folks a couple of minutes for additional questions. Can we display a collection variable in a visual force table?
Yes. I guess you probably could pass that collection variable out of the flow as an outbound value. I would be interested if you're already using a visual force table, though. I would probably try to just keep that all in visual force and Apex, because you're going to have to write Apex to pass that value out anyways, unless there's some sort of piece in the logic that you want to make it be a little bit more dynamic with the flow for what happens there.
Okay, Lauren asks, what level of class is this for the automation hour? Beginner, intermediate, or advanced?
That's a good question. Maybe intermediate or beginner. I don't think it was advanced, but I might be wrong.
Lisa asks, can you do fuzzy searches in Flow?
That is a good question. Do y'all know? Have you tried that, Rakesh?
Yeah, I've not tried that. I know for Rakesh is on mute.
I mean, you've got contains as an option, so that's about as. I thought you had it. That's a date. So if I go count name, and then we get contains. So that's as close to fuzzy, I guess, as you probably could get. But I don't think it's a true fuzzy search in the sense that we have like up with the regular Salesforce search bar where you can use the asterisks.
Maybe you can create a formula and then you can use in that search, not sure.
Yeah, maybe.
Mo says, for dynamic choices, can we select multiple records and perform an update?
Yes, you can. With that, you'd want to. You'd need to do a loop to loop through and work on the records and create the updates that you would want to have. If you passed in the IDs of the records and that was all you needed, you wouldn't have to do more lookups. But if you had to do lookups inside of it, then you would need to work on that. I know Rakesh has a great blog post on exactly that. I'm not sure if Rakesh knows offhand which number it is. I think it's in the 40s under his flows. So if you go to automationchampion.com and look for a blog post on multi-select, you can see that he's got that exact scenario. So I would reference that blog post. And then there's a few other ones out there for dealing with how to parse it as well. But check out Automation Champion.
Also, can we do filter logic in flows like 1 and 2 and 3? Oh, sorry, and 3 or 4, etc.
Not really. I've seen. I think it was it Eric? We had somebody last fall who did something similar or talked about that. I think in the success community group. And if you use the same, so if I was to, we'll just use the contact details. If I was to do last name twice in a row, that would function as an or, at least my understanding of how that works. I typically, if it's something where I need to make more complex field logic, I'm lazy and I'm not very trusting. So I'll normally create a formula field on the record that I'm querying against and use that as my my filter. Or use one or two lookups. So I might check. I might do one lookup with one set of values, and if I don't get the value that I want, I'll do a decision that says I didn't find anything, so let me go try this other lookup. So it might be that you have a few extra lookups that you're using. I'm not sure if there's that's definitely a pain point that I've had. So I'm not sure if there's a better solution than maybe just having either a formula field if that solves it, or multiple record lookups or fast lookups.
Okay, last call for questions. Okay, is there a way to trigger flows on delete? Only way I've achieved this is using another flow to count records.
You can, and I've been meaning to, I think Andy in the Cloud is probably the best reference for this specific scenario. So if you go to andyinthecloud.com, he's got something on there about using Apex to trigger, or an Apex trigger to launch a flow. So if you set up an Apex trigger that on delete launched your flow, and that's what your trigger called, you could do it that way. Otherwise, you're kind of out of luck. But the cool part is if you get that and you're doing that, you could also reuse that trigger or that concept on objects that Process Builder won't launch a flow from. You could also have a flow launch from other triggerable objects.
I here did an automation hour recently, but the video cut out and went blank. Can you update, please? I've found her examples around Salesforce pages are helpful and wasn't able to see the full demo. So I know we received comments on that. When she was doing her session, she did stop sharing. So there wasn't any issue with our video recording. So that was the deal with that piece. She was just talking at that point. She wasn't actually showing anything. Sorry. Okay, if there aren't any more, I think we could end this call. If folks think of other questions after this call, definitely post it out on Salesforce Automation Hour, and we will take a look and respond. And once we post the blog post on our site with a link to the deck as well as the recording, you'll also receive that in the email from us. So thanks so much for joining, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Happy weekend.